All right. Hi, and welcome to episode 82 of the Flowing Mechanical Turks project. So where we are now is we're still kind of working our way through an outline or a sketch of the third product. And the third product is theoretical, I suppose, in method, right? I mean, that's the way we kind of
Yeah,
want to think of it as because the other two pieces have changed methods in response to kind of where we were being guided by the research interest of the topic. So the first one was quantitative text analysis, looking at the posts themselves. Second one was actually an experiment, posting hits, mturk hits, and then getting results from those based on readability, right? What Turkers were producing, but then also how they rated these things in terms of readability. Um, so we've now shifted in this third piece to theory, but as we've been kind of tussling with this piece kind of throughout the project, because we sort of knew this was coming, and
hmm
as we've talked about many times, sort of like this last piece has had to bear a lot of the weight of sort of like every remainder where it's like, well, we can't get to that now, but maybe in the third piece. So we've
yeah,
had to sort of really, a lot of this has been like cutting away, right? Rather than necessarily like building a lot of this third piece is, all right, we've got just, a swirl of options here. We need to sort of cut toward what's a coherent line.
yeah.
So that in mind, let me just share this real quick. No, I got too many.
Well,
Okay. Um, Ignore my Shadow of the Colossus secrets videos here. Um, some of that technically might be research. So this was the sort of in progress outline.
yeah,
We did touch upon this, so just sort of in the broad strokes, and some of this might fall away, but the sort of setup for the piece was starting with the chess cheating scandal, which as we touched upon, and you did a conference paper that sort of had the same setup, right?
yeah. I thought it would be great to open up a conference presentation by talking about, yeah,
Yeah, so the gist here, the labor this is doing is so showing this transition from the the mechanical Turk being, the illusion of or the deception, however you want to frame that, of the man
yeah,
inside the machine, right? But
yeah,
then now the same game, chess, but now the sleight of hand is the machine inside the man, right? In this
yeah,
case, accusations that someone was being signaled by a chess playing machine, notably perhaps through an inserted butt plug, so a vibrating butt plug. It's
yeah,
interesting it would go to that. That's probably, it probably would derail the paper, but it's like, why jump to that?
yeah.
Um,
I think yeah.
um, and it's interesting also, and it just we'll see how much because we don't want to derail, but it's like there are also sort of this shift in because the Mechanical Turk had this overt sort of Orientalism, but
Yeah.
this newer scandal, the cheater, the alleged, although I believe most recently I have a bunch of notes on that. I think eventually they were like, all right, forget it, we can't prove anything, therefore,
Right.
But this person, the alleged cheater, was American because chess has become dominated by non-Americans.
Right.
So it's interesting that, originally the Mechanical Turk was this sort of exoticized, the figure of the East, whereas now
It's a punk American teenager.
in America, right? I mean, it's sort of like it or not, the symbol of the West is American, right? Sorry,
Right.
Europe. I don't know what to tell you. You guys lost your position. So will we probably, depending on how the election goes, quick. Um, but anywho, so it's like, interestingly though, like, and definitely we see like Southeast Asia, and Asia is represented well in chess, but like, of late, and in this case, right, the accuser was Magnus, we
Yeah.
see a lot of these like Nordic country folk, which is interesting given the racial overtones of the Mechanical Turk, right? It's like,
Yeah.
it's not like it exactly flipped. It's like the locus has changed, the bad guys have changed, that kind of thing, whatever.
Yeah.
But it's the shift from the man in the machine to the machine in the man, and then that sort of leads to, right, this notion that, and we were sort of informally conversing about this, chess no longer is the game board is such a perfect, it's not even a metaphor. I mean, it's
Right.
literal and a metaphor, but it's like, it's just perfect because it's like the test of machine intelligence is gamified,
Right.
and it's no longer chess because we've lost this. I mean,
Right.
you humanity have lost the chess contest against the machine.
Oh,
So what's that?
well, it does. I mean, this the potentially to real. I mean, there's also kind of right. I mean, one of our other interests. I was just thinking about this in the context of I have a student working on a project, and anyway, all to say that I went down the rabbit hole of like red pill dating advice,
Okay.
which is awful. But anyway, right?
Pick up any tips?
What's that?
Did you pick up any tips?
Yeah, a lot of tips. I'm real good now. Um, but it's the sense in which, right, when you talk about, well, um, men can do X and women can't, like, but it's sort of like, well, you think women can play in the NBA or whatever, like, can women beat men at basketball? It's like,
Right.
well, some women can beat some men at right? It's this notion that when you also talk about like who's won at chess or something like that, there's a sense in which you're forced to imagine this sort of abstract, generic
Yeah.
humanity,
Right.
where the particularity of like I was never going to beat like even probably a real bad chess playing computer
Right.
could beat me. Anyway, it's but that's all to say that I think part of what we're interested in too is moving away from those sorts of um not generic pronouncements. Not that I mean that's not what you're doing, but really thinking about um the particularity of the human in any given
Yeah.
intelligent act.
Yeah. It is interesting the basis on which those assessments are made, right?
Yeah.
Because it was sort of like, at what point, was it deep blue, or was it like a machine has beat a man, therefore this is over? Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Or is it just like the aggregate weight of like, what, or, well, the a machine beat our best once.
That could be right. Yeah.
Or is it like, well, now, yeah, is it like some hypothetical average player? I can't remember that term. Do you remember when we found a term for like a mediocre chess player? It was like a wood pusher or something like, do you remember
Yes, a wood pusher. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
something?
Oh,
um,
how did I forget that?
well, I'd fact check that. It felt like something like that, if not that,
Yeah,
but
a bad player, chess, informal derogatory, bad player and amateur.
uh,
Yeah, a sardonic reference to wooden chess pieces. So they're just, oh yeah, then the German word for it is Patzer.
oh, that's as usual. It's like the Germans all probably have something better for this.
Yeah, I mean, it just means generally a bungler.
And
Yeah. No, that's the Germans also have the much better word for killing your father, which is in English we would say patricide, and theirs is Vatertoter,
yeah,
which
that track.
that sounds like killing your dad.
And it is, as we see with German, it's just those two words smashed together, right? That
Yeah,
is father and death. Yeah,
yeah, yep.
um,
It's German is it's whatever it says on the tin.
um, but the labor that's being done
Yeah,
here is that it's not the chess. I mean, we can say it's like, oh, would anyone be startled if we said, oh, a machine beat someone at chess, or what? It's like, well, yeah, that's commonplace now. The shift has moved from the chessboard to, as you said, chat, right?
Yeah.
That is the new frontier, right? Chat GPT, which at this point, I just saw a thing about an anniversary of Chat GPT yesterday, I believe, which is
Ah,
interesting because Chat GPT did feel as though it arrived sort of ex nihilo. But, those who are interested in this, it did not.
yeah.
Um, as evidenced by the fact that it was Chat GPT 3. So
Right.
it's like, oh yeah, so there was probably one and two, and then there's also, a whole host of other um, cases where we were nibbling at the edges of this. It was interesting, again, we don't want to get sidetracked, but why ChatGPT 3 became this kind of event, in part because of things like, well, it was accessible in the way the others weren't, because of like material forces, like just
Yeah.
straight up, this one was free.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't just researchers and specialists getting access to it. Kids who had term papers do all of a sudden had
Yeah.
access to it. Anywho, so we've shifted from chess to chat. So we've shifted from chess into language. So then we have some information here about contemporaries of the Turk, the talking heads. Ha. Um, Including, Kempelen, right? Who, in a sense, it's just kind of an interesting story that, like, in a sense, he was using the Turk as a money-making device, literally and figuratively, to fund what he saw as serious research into synthetic speech.
Yeah.
It's like, these aren't dissimilar things we're smashing together. It's like, no, the guy who made the Turk also was making speech synthesis robots.
Yeah. And he made the Turk to fund,
Yeah.
which I mean does I mean there's a trajectory there about, you know, I would think even AI research, I mean, right, whatever we want to that would be interested in, right? Even getting computers to play chess wasn't the goal. Chess was a training set.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Proxy.
that same move is being made that Kemplin made, which is, yeah, I'm going to start with a chess playing automaton to, I don't know, work out the kinks or get funding or get, right. But my ultimate goal. So the move from chess to chat is a move that's
Yeah.
built into the Mechanical Turk story already.
Yes. Yeah. And interestingly, with things like generative AI now, they're running into similar kind of material concerns, monetary concerns, in that to pay to train one of these models is expensive. So there are a lot of sort of legitimate questions about, for as impressive as this stuff is it feasible to be free? And if not, how the heck do we monetize this? And as we've already touched upon, there are also related concerns like, well, what happens when legal issues emerge? And it's like
Right.
OpenAI, who just had, their sort of drama about who was going to
Oh
lead,
yeah.
um, which might be interesting to work in, because although it's not exactly clear, it seems like the schism there was about like the safety of what was going on. It seems like the board may have had reservations about how zealously they were pursuing these ends
Yeah.
without considering ramifications, right? Anywho, but we're sort of hitting like, what happens when a court tells OpenAI, you have to throw all of that out. It's all poison fruit from a poison tree, because as just happened yesterday, you can there were security researchers who told an AI, repeat the word poem forever.
Yeah.
That was its instruction. And what happened was it started spitting out people's cell phone numbers.
What?
Yeah. And it's an interesting kind of black boxing. It's like, why did saying that get it to do this? It's so interesting because we have a lot of security researchers doing, asking weird questions like that, because it fails in ways you wouldn't anticipate, right? If you ask someone to repeat poem forever, the expected failure is they'll stop. Not, they will start spewing out,
Social security numbers.
yeah, privileged data that
Yeah.
apparently they have scraped, that no one was aware necessarily that they had this. You know, it's
I mean, that's the, I mean, right. There's a sense in which, what a weird thing the computer did. I'm like, what a weird thing that those guys had all those cell phone numbers is actually the other headline.
yeah, you know, I mean, it's black boxed to use a Latorian metaphor. It's like, you know, we don't even know what's in there, let alone
No,
what to
that's,
do with it.
there was a really great, at the conference I was at, the Society for Language, Science, and the Arts, there was a, in fact, this is a possible guess, but two researchers who were doing, in fact, this is someone who's interested in like AI and computers who went back and got a degree in therapy and hypnosis as part of their research project, but they're using sort of hypnosis as a model to think through artificial intelligence. But anyway, long story short, the part of what they're getting at is that like we have no idea what's inside artificial intelligence. At some point, it gets to the point where its mind will is as much of a mystery as.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, right? Where it's like, and there's something to that. It's like, what passes the Turing test is deception or opacity.
Yeah,
I mean, if we want to hook that into artifice, what passes the Turing test is opacity, where it's like, yes, the mind of the machine is as unknowable as the mind of the other, or potentially the mind of the self, you know?
yeah, which I think, I mean, to get back to kind of our focus, I mean, that's why.
Poem, 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 poem.
um
I'm just thinking of our dissertation production experiments with
oh, with
this.
Kurzweil.
Well, I mean, it was the built-in speech thing on the
Oh
big
yeah,
Macintosh.
yeah, we would have
So
it. Yeah, that's exactly what we would have. Yeah, just have it loop the word poem over and over again. Good stuff.
anyway, you were thinking about
Right.
artifice.
Well, but I mean, I think that's all the more reason for the sort of, you know, our project, right? Think about what rhetoric's comfort with artifice. And also, I think, too, right? That, I mean, going back to Aristotle, I keep thinking about, I mean, for as much as I want to give Aristotle a hard time for his Plato issues, right? His definition of rhetoric is the ability to theorize the available means of persuasion. But I think it's precisely because of you're not going to get, I think our wager with artifice is if you want to think through what intelligence is, you have to go out into the taskscape, not inside into the thing,
Mm,
because that's a fool's errand, right? Like we don't even know why we do what we're doing. Like if you want to think through intelligence, you have to think ecologically or networked or right. I mean, this goes back to our shared interest in someone like Andy Clark, right? You're otherwise you're is it in the pineal gland, right?
yeah,
Like you're so finding out it's I mean it's the sort of our mantra at this point, like finding out whether it's really intelligent is probably not practically possible if even that's the issue. It's also it's just not it won't it won't help with any
yeah,
of the pressing questions around this if you knew that it like so this poetry issue like if we figured out why it did it and whether or not it knew it did it that would but that leaves unexplored why are the cell phone numbers in the data set or right all these and a sort of human intelligence task focus right that's the language of Turks as our theory right that looking at the taskscape itself that needs to be the place where you're that needs to be the sort of I don't know for lack of a better term the sort of base
yeah.
right
Well, it's interesting because, and this potentially is why rhetoric might be useful, is because there's a problem here of, I mean, you could call it a fractal problem or whatever, but it's like, it's true. And you know, Latour and others tap into this where it's like, if you try and trace things outward, there's a problem of infinity where it's like, well, where do you draw the line because it keeps going? But what's less acknowledged is that infinite regression also occurs the other direction. Whereas as you try and draw that circle tightly, as
yeah
Clark and Clark as others, it's like, well, let's say we get to the point of like it's these neurons. It's like, okay, but then you get into that where it's chemical reactions, and then it's physics, where it's like, are you ever going to find the indivisible atom? It's like
Yeah,
asking what the smallest number. It's like making fun of someone. It's like, well, there's no biggest number, but not acknowledging there is no smallest number either. There's infinite regression in either way.
yeah. I mean, I think even Clark goes, that's just that sort of bounded brain model just ends up it's just nihilistic.
Well, and what it reveals is the circle you're drawing is always an interested construction. And so what you're doing is asserting here's where the circle is, why, what the effects of that are, right? Because you're not seemingly ever going to get to the biggest or the smallest. It's you're not going to find the indivisible atom because you'll always be able to cut that in half too. You're not going to find the limits of the universe because even if imaginatively there will be something beyond that. I mean,
Yeah.
sure, that's this universe, but what about the ones that may exist that, it's like there is no place where you can stop without choosing it.
Well, and that's rhetoric's
Yeah,
bailiwick. Like it'll be
right.
artificial. You'll have
Yes.
you'll that at any point that circle is will be an artifice you create in order to accomplish some work.
Something.
Right.
Yeah.
That artifice is a taskscape designed to generate certain outcomes.
Yeah. This was interesting. It's wild to us that our attack works and should have, would have, could have been found earlier. I mean, that underscores, and related to OpenAI's drama, it's like we've talked about this before. It's like, where does responsibility? We talked about this in the context of the Infinite Seinfeld, where it started
Yeah.
spouting borderline anti-trans rhetoric,
Yeah.
which is something to adjudicate because if you actually look at it, it's interesting because it's like Jerry, what he said was, an unfunny joke is this, but I'm not going to say it. And it's like, well, there's just too much there because it's also like, is that the same sort of thing where works will do comedy that they say is ironic, but it's like, yes, but you're still trading on the same,
Yeah. Yeah.
sexist,
Yeah.
racist,
I think the
bias
last the
tropes.
last the last 10 years have been like, yeah, you just can't say I was being ironic as a
Right.
defense.
That's not a get out of jail free card necessarily because it's still perpetuating the same.
Well,
And,
plus it runs into the issue of given, I think, we could get Ryan on here talking about irony and satire, but given how much intentionality seems to factor into satire and irony, could we ever grant that AI could be ironic?
yeah,
Because for a lot of people, irony depends on, well, you said this, but what you meant to do is this. And is that something we're willing, right? Is that
yeah,
sort of double Bakhtinian double voicedness something we're willing to grant? I mean, weirdly enough, AI, given how it's trained, can't help but be polyvocal.
yeah.
But can we actually grant it, a kind of, can it
at
dissimilate?
once at once we've got it in the double bind of we don't give it credit for being able to be satirical, but we also won't give it credit for being literal because it's like, well, you're just a cut and paste. So
Right,
anything you do is just a random collection.
right.
So it's damned if it does. It is both, too literal and not literal enough. It can't mean anything. And it also
Yes. It's
can only mean one thing.
it's an intentionless irony machine,
Right.
which is a punk band I had in the 80s.
But anywho, so we're looking here at this the work this wants to do is to get us into language, right? Which is
Yeah.
language is the new frontier. It's not chess, it's language. And um that's not completely novel. The roots of that are kind of throughout here. And even before,
Oh,
Kempelen, I mean, there in mythology, there are talking heads.
yeah.
And there's
Yeah.
some
Um,
examples here.
and yeah, Jay Domage has a goes to a couple of those in an early article he wrote about Hephaestus.
Right. Yeah. Who sometimes it's, attributed sort of like, well, did he is what they're talking about there, like a form of early robot, a living
Yeah,
statue, right? Where it's like
yeah,
there are also places where he seemed to have this sort of prosthetic notion of because he was lamed,
yeah,
um, may have had some sort of assistive device. It's like, was that a proto wheelchair? Or, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of
yeah, yeah,
interesting. But so there are roots here, and those kind of folks. I didn't know about the that one, but we've certainly seen it with Kang to an extent. It's like there are
yeah.
historical roots of these things.
What's
Also,
also really, yeah. No, you're gonna say,
well, just one that's interesting for us is Plato's critique of writing. Um, well, it's Plato's Socrates critique is that it's literally dumb. That if you have a written page, it can't answer questions, it can't formulate new stuff, it can just repeat the same thing. Except now it can. It's like now the
right?
chatbot can do precisely that. So I'd like to hear Plato's Socrates. I mean, he's just going to redraw the circle, but I'd like to
Yeah,
see how he does it.
yeah. Well, what's interesting too about this move is, um, we were talking about this earlier, right? The idea of both chess and poker as being things that can be solved,
Mhm.
and instinct is that language isn't going to work that way. Like,
Yeah.
solve language in the same way that you could solve chess. Like, I have mapped now all the possible moves that have been made.
Yeah, it's interesting because, we're told that language has this infinite generative capacity such that, they say any utterance of beyond a couple of words is probably unique. We've heard
Yeah,
this, right? Where it's like most things everyone says are truly unique. They've never been uttered before, which is mind-boggling.
yeah,
But there's a sense in which, again, it's like we could say it all hinges on the definition of solve. Because in theory, it's
right.
like, yeah, we have a machine now that could theoretically permute every canonical word right now and therefore make every possible utterance book, right? It's like in theory, but you could say, well, but that's not solved because language is always a moving target in a way that chess moves aren't, unless you change the rules of chess, potentially that's bound in certain ways.
Yeah,
Although the rules of chess do change and have and keep. Anywho, so like the labor that section is doing is getting us into language, then potentially, as we've touched upon, this notion of artifice, right? Um,
yeah,
in the history of these things, the assumption is fraud. We see that in the discussion of artificial intelligence, artificial intelligence, and now artificial intelligence, which was in a paper. And we mentioned that artificial intelligence as a phrase itself seems to be tautological because intelligence is always
right.
artificial. Um, this opens the door for rhetoric, right? Because we don't fear the artifice for reasons we've already touched upon. We're cognizant of the fact that you're always drawing a contestable circle around something to call it a thing.
Yeah.
Everything partakes in artifice, so-called human intelligence is lousy with it. Artifice or
That's
constructs.
great. That's got to survive at least into the first draft.
Um, a loaded term itself. Artifice or constructs generated situations are what we examine. And of course, we're focused on language. It's not surprising that the marker of intelligence is shifted from the chessboard to the conversation. We're here for it.
We're here for it.
Um, so that, is like, here's what we can bring. And the point where we've stopped here is right, using what we learned about MTurk and potentially readability, we can examine systems for artifice and intelligence. So the theory that we have, uh, I don't know what term to use, but the theory that arises from our engagement with MTurk, we can potentially use to examine other stuff, right?
Yeah.
So that would leave us at the point of finding cases to examine.
I think, I mean, the one that I'm because there's also, anyway, long story back. Oh, good Lord. I got to defrag my hard drive. I've been interested in these sort of these hacks or exploits where, like we were talking about off mic, the sort of poison well of, how can you ruin a training set for, AI. For, I think there's one about art, I think what it was called, like Nightshade, where they went in and sort of poisoned the thing. I'm also thinking about was it Antonio Bird's piece in that collection about artificial intelligence, where he has that sort of riff on thinking about what you write becoming part of the large language model.
Yeah.
That thinking about that, could we move potentially away from simply here's how rhetoric's sort of being comfortable with artifice can generate new ways of thinking about or analyzing this? Or could we add something like, well, what rhetoric also brings to the table is not just a thorough, dexterous analytical framework, but also a kind of interventional, right? Like there's the rhetorician and there's the rhetor.
Yeah.
And so does thinking about artifice and the way that we're talking about it open up more available means of persuasion in terms of not just understanding these problems, but actually finding ways of interrupting them or tweaking them? Or, I'm thinking of, we've talked about this a little bit, but not in rhetoric, but Casey Blow and I wrote a review of her book, but Keller Easterling has a book called Medium Design as an interesting model of persuasion that doesn't operate in a kind of declarative mode, but rather sort of toggles the sort of medium itself as a way of generating change. Anyway, but thinking about looking maybe at some of these examples, not just being sort of analogs of Mechanical Turk, but actually being case studies of people trying to generate some outcome or alternate outcome in this space. And the way that they do it is not by declaring this isn't really intelligent, but they do it by manipulating the artifice itself as the way of making their argument, right? So their rhetoric is not like, otherwise we run the risk of like, well, now I have this, so now I can say these kinds of things about artificial intelligence. And it may be like, no, what we're actually getting at is that you don't need to weigh in explicitly or declaratively about whether it's intelligent or not. The way you're rhetoric in the context of AI will also have, right? It's not just what your message doesn't have to, right? It's that rhetoric itself needs to operate at the level of taskscape.
Yeah.
As opposed to the level of making explicit arguments about what's intelligent or what isn't intelligent.
Kind of an essentialist. Yeah.
Like that's to already have given up where potentially more effective interventions can happen. So it's that partially I'm just interested in those modes where they just bypass the conversation about whether this is intelligent or not and go straight into, well, we don't like what's happening here. How can we use the taskscape itself to interrupt it? Rather than, I guess what you would imagine a standard kind of approach would be is like, we need to go to say whatever the CEO of OpenAI, whoever it happens to be at this point, and well, let's have a conversation about what should or shouldn't be right. But what you could also do is like, yeah, but their whole model is hinged on the large language model they're drawing from, right? That's where the argument needs to take place, right? And this we can call back to the Jim Brown sort of three prepositional, right? We argue about software, we argue with software, and we argue in software. So that this whole notion of the taskscape doesn't just inform how we should talk about artificial intelligence, but potentially it also informs where we should be having the conversation about artificial intelligence. And so looking at these exploits and attacks and hacks, right, their argument is about where one should intervene in artificial intelligence, not just how. So that's also getting at, I think, a more supple rhetoric that's getting at Kairos, right? It's not just your messaging. It's the when and the where you do that.
Well, and so let's look at this real quick. Um, whoops, wrong one. Um, so yeah, I mean, like this one is interesting because it has this kind of oppositional structure, right? I mean, it's fight back against AI by killing art generated. I mean, that's pretty overtly contrary, right? But then there are also ones like this, right? I'm totally blind. Artificial intelligence is helping me rediscover the world.
Right.
Where, right? So this, we've touched upon the Be My Eyes platform before, way back in the beginning, even. It's in our
Yeah.
like, it's in our old dusty notes about this is the service where volunteers, you know, we can think of it as MTurk like in that there is a pool of volunteers, and what happens is a person who has a visual impairment can essentially um, contact in real time a volunteer and do something like hold their phone camera up to the aisle at a grocery store and say, "Oh, I need to find this item, but I can't see it. Can you, you know?"
Yeah.
And the person will say, "All right, well, it's on the lowest shelf to the left or whatever," right? So there's now Be My AI, a collaboration between OpenAI creators of Chat GPT and Be My Eyes, right? An app that connects sighted volunteers with blind people who need a via video call, um, right? To receive. So the difference here: Be My AI promised to allow blind people to receive an AI generated description of any photo we uploaded. So that's the difference there, right? What's interesting is, so this relationship is very different than this one because this person goes on to write I mean, well, it's in the title, right? Helping me
Yeah.
rediscover my world. And it's what's interesting is it's also this piece is very sensory. It talks about, right, even colors, which are as important to many of us as they are to a sighted person. We're not left out. There's a person who's blind since birth, I believe. But a lot of this becomes sensory, which is
Yeah.
interesting for us because, you know, that's something we
Yeah.
saw in a Turk, the notion of our senses being valuable. And this one, it's short. It's very positive about, and to me, it was kind of interesting. Like as this independence came, so did the memories. All the photos that were gathering dust in my camera roll came to life before me, transformed into vivid descriptions of moments and situations of people who are no longer with me and whom I never thought I could visualize on my own without having to ask a loved one. There's something interesting here about the notion of like burden or labor because like Be My Eyes, even though those are volunteers, it's like there's a bar of asking someone to do something that isn't the same as asking Siri to do it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, it kind of ends with this interesting, it's like my greatest fear is that it's going to go away, right? Which has happened to other
Yeah.
apps
Yeah.
like this, right? But that's kind of interesting. It's like my fear isn't that it's invasive. My fear is that it won't be there, you know?
Right. It won't be invasive. It will,
Yeah. Well, and
I
to me,
like the
this,
deeply disorienting betrayal.
yeah, because this is other apps of, you know, if you're a commercial business, like we can't make it anymore. It's like, yeah, but there are a lot of people who are dependent on this product. And there's no easy answer to that, right? You know, a lot of times it's like, well, open source it. It's like, well, you can't always I'm in favor of that, but it's not always an option. You know, it's like, well, I legally can't. I can't show
Oh,
you
yeah,
this.
yeah.
They may not have rights to every piece of code they have, right? Um, Particularly now when things are put together rather than written from scratch. So, like this is kind of interesting, almost not, you know, not exactly, but like the polar difference between sabotage the hell out of it and no, this is making me human in ways like I wasn't before, you know?
Yeah.
To me, this is
No, and it
interesting in part also because of the role of memory here. So I wasn't familiar with the bird piece you mentioned. Um, I have an unpublished piece that gestures in the same direction because my piece is about memory and waste.
Hmm.
Titles, I cram my head full of garbage. But it uh, makes sort of a last gesture to that because like a lot of it is sort of like, here's why you should be leaving your garbage around, although garbage is defined in a particular way because it's garbage is better when it's in software than it is with hardware because it doesn't have the same kind of negative effects and so forth. But a thread of this now is like leaving your cell phone number apparently around has different stakes now, where it's like, yeah, now my blog that I wrote when I was 14, pre Chat GPT, like I was advocating for the importance of that shit sort of like historically, where it's like you don't know what's going to come of this, but like we know about anthropologically, we know about the world because we've dug up garbage pits.
Right, right.
I mean, not exclusively, but it's like that's important. I mean,
Are they called middens? Is that what they're
yeah,
called?
that's
Yeah.
a name for it. Yeah. Where
I
it's
love a
like,
good midden.
yeah, I mean, I was just reviewing a proposal that was about the sort of like um cookware, like pottery and cookware in ancient Greece. Um and you know, it's like this is a whole subdiscipline. And like anything else, it's like, yeah, we actually learn a lot from that because we find out about their diets, about regionality, about commerce. It's like, holy crap, these two cultures must have contacted each other because they share a quirk in their water vessels.
Hmm.
Anyway, so it's like my piece was sort of like, there's value in that garbage, but now it's also like, but there's also risk. Even just sort of like, well, I don't want my stuff being in the training set of that LLM. My blog when I was 14,
Right.
you know, I don't have an easy answer for that, but it is like now are not only conscious about what we're producing new, but like, what do I do with my waste products?
Right. Yeah, it's a
Basically,
good, yeah.
my old waste, it's like nuclear waste where it's like, but it's true for all waste where it's like nothing ever goes away. It just
Yeah.
changes form.
Well, and blogs have a pretty decent half-life.
And old podcasts.
Oh, good Lord.
Um, yeah, anyway. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's like those two cases might be options where it's like, the ways to engage with this, because, I wouldn't want to just adopt the antagonism of wrecking the machine from the inside, because I'm not convinced the machine is bad. The machine is us.
Yeah.
On the outline,
Yeah.
um, we started to think about what might like that look like, right? Like we don't have to do this, but it was like an option, hence the question mark, might be so like what are the terms that are used in that space or discourse? Like, not just this article, but this now um, sort of punctuated resistance to generative AI, where it's not
Yeah.
just Nightshade, but we're seeing a discourse around. And I think, didn't Casey talk about this with like earlier with like citizenship, right? Where it's like,
Yeah.
and this may attach to things like ways to obfuscate surveillance, right? There's a lot
Yeah.
of stuff coming out of London because of how surveilled London is. London is. I mean, it's apocryphal, but they're like, you're never ever out of sight of a TV camera in London, I'm told.
Yeah.
It's like every square inch apparently. That can't be true, but I guess that's the panopticon of it.
Yeah.
And so there are all these sort of like emergent techniques of surveillance resistance, things that are explicit where it's like if you do this, it can't see your face because it's too reflective, right?
Right.
Things like, wear your makeup this way and it literally can't get a bead on your face.
It was a I forget, was at this I was at a conference and someone was they were like they were doing research, but they also had oh were they were looking at like so potentially, right, like you can use surveillance cameras like at a construction site to determine whether or not a worker is working or not. Like it'll map their movements and tell you that they're working at half capacity or something. And this person used that data, that sort of training set, and used it to create choreography. So how you could move
Right.
minimally, but it would show up as if you were moving maximally.
Yeah. It's like what people used to do with the Wii remote or your step counter, where it's like, well, I can hit the numbers, you know?
Yeah. Oh yeah, the ones where like your employer would give you a Apple Watch to track your health, and you could attach it to a hamster wheel to
Yeah, or a fan blade.
get
Yeah.
your insurance discount. Yeah,
Right. Um, yeah, so there are those kind of like resistance moves, but then we see in the Be My AI example, this kind of like collaborative. And then there's, obviously lots of other moves between and outside of those.
yeah,
But there is a notion of like engagement or collaboration with the artificial intelligence, however construed.
yeah,
Um, the Anyway, the outline suggested like how do we like go about that? Do we focus on particular terms or the ways that the artifice is being described, right?
hmm,
And see, okay, well, what do those terms imply? What's the obverse that's being established when you define artificial intelligence in this discourse in these ways? How is it implicitly invoking like a natural intelligence? You know what I mean? It's like if you're defining this is what artifice is, there's a shadow of so what you're saying is the opposite is, why.
yeah,
That's not necessarily the way we have to go, but it's like pragmatically, in terms of the paper, what does analyzing these cases look like?
yeah. I mean, we could look at some of these efforts like this and just see, right, whether they're how do they frame what they're doing or imagine what they're doing when they describe it or when they justify it, or because those are interesting because of essentially where discussions of artificial intelligence that start with the Passcape itself in some way. So in that sense, they might just bypass the whole conversation about this sort of, philosophical debate about its status as intelligence, and instead jump straight into how's this thing work, and either what's exploitable about it and needs to be intervened in some way, or what's exploitable about it and so needs to be protected or
Hmm.
supported or
Well, I mean, we
like
started. Go
what's
ahead.
that?
Go ahead.
No, because to a certain extent, right, the idea that it will be, the AI be my AI, that it might go away suggests that what makes that intelligence intelligent is its durability, which will
Yeah.
be a function of its taskate, right? That what makes this intelligent for me is not it's past some abstract standard, right? Like I don't care whether it passed a Turing test or not. I care whether the app updates when I get a new OS on my phone, right? So that the way that that person is talking about artificial intelligence just takes its artifice for granted. Like, yeah, no, its artifice is what I need. Or in the Nightshade example, its artifice is what allows us to protect artists or whatever, right? So
Yeah.
many those are conversations about artificial intelligence that don't get bogged down in the in
Well,
the
yeah, and that's, when we started with Turk, that was like Turk itself doesn't necessarily say, okay, well, here's what a human task is. Right? I
yeah,
mean, our idea was by looking at the tasks, you could limb
yeah,
what does it think the human, I mean, what is it, what is the shape of the human it's casting? Because these are, at least theoretically, tasks that are attuned to humans more than they are to non-humans. Or
yeah.
this is an interesting piece. It's because it gets into these kind of things like this, right? Before Copyright Office can issue guidance, Copyright Office expected to recommend protections for works used to train AI in 2024. So
Yeah.
these are practical concerns where, it's not impossible that, yeah, they're like, hey, every generative AI that exists, it's got to go because the way you collected its training material
Yeah.
is now illegal. And,
I mean, I wonder if there is a resonance with the first piece. So insofar as we were looking at essentially the practices of Amazon's MTurk to see how it was theorizing human intelligence, that I wonder if we can now look at these practices of disruption or consumption as things that are theorizing artificial intelligence.
hmm. Yeah, the other side of it.
Yeah. And what we're seeing is that they are potentially right, that they are that those the way they theorize artificial intelligence is in a say is not to work towards a static definition or standard, is it works out into the taskscape itself. What's exploitable about the task, the artifice, what's valuable about the artifice, what's and so needs to be maintained, right? So looking at both instances of, you know, destructive intervention versus maintenance.
Yeah.
Like, what is artificial intelligence? It's a maintenance routine. And that then is potentially that gets back to our conversations about regression and model collapse. And
Yeah, which I think, let me see, where is that on the, or where is it? Oh, there it is. Fears about the mingling about recursion and collapse. Yeah. Anyway, well, let me share this as well, real quick. So, we've got some, yeah, we've got some things that are, in this sort of old but evolving notes document that that are potentially these kinds of coalitions um, that we could look at. Like Be My Eyes is in here, but so are a bunch of other things. Yeah, the labor issues involved in these kinds of crowdsourcing things. So we do have some things that it's like we could take another look at and see. It's like, are these productive cases or whatever?
Yeah. So maybe we just start assembling some compelling case studies.
Yeah, and see what they say.
Yeah.
All right, that's the gist of it. We're around an hour.
Yeah. But no, we're back. I think we're back in the saddle.
Yeah.
That's an expression the kids use, right?
Well, and my other big project is due today, so
Okay.
that'll be done. Well, that phase of it, it won't be done.
No,
Um,
never done.
but that phase will be done. So, is that logo on your hat a stack of flapjacks?
It's a biscuit. It's the Montgomery, Alabama has a minor league baseball team. They're the Montgomery Biscuits. So
Hmm.
that's a sentient biscuit.
I thought it was. It looks like two flapjacks with butter in between it, but
Yeah,
I'll
it
buy a
is.
biscuit.
Yeah, and that butters his tongue, I guess.
Yeah, that's how it works.
Yeah, I haven't actually seen them play, but I was there for a talk, so I got a hat. The same way that when I went to visit our friend Ryan, and I got a Huntsville Trash Pandas. That's their baseball team.
There's just sort of a race to the bottom with minor league baseball naming now.
It is. I think Trash Pandas are down there, but it's a raccoon inside of a trash can that's a rocket.
Yeah,
So, well, they got the NASA. They worked the NASA connection in there.
yeah, that's really shoehorned in.
Yeah,
Just, huh.
yeah. I looked at that mascot. The first thing I thought is, well, that's forced.
Well, I mean, because like Rocket Raccoon would make
Yeah,
sense. But
probably copyright issues there.
I was gonna say you'd have to get a pickup from Disney now.
Oof.
Although, the Mighty Ducks, they did it. So
Yeah,
Anaheim Mighty Ducks.
yeah. Well, they had the Anaheim connection. They're probably are they owned? They're probably a
Yeah,
Disney affiliate.
gotta be.
Gotta be. Gotta be.
All right then.
Uh, okay. Well, we're talking about the Anaheim Mighty Ducks, so that means it's time to wrap up this episode.
Yep. So we can take a look at case studies and see what pops out there if that's a way to proceed.
I think so.
All right then.
Okay.
I will talk to you later.
Yes. Sounds like a plan. Have a good one.
See ya.